So welcome, friends. As y'all are coming in, I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you for showing up. That is the first and sometimes the hardest thing to do, so good on you. I'm Hunter. I'm one of your hosts here and moderators at Power to Fly, and you are probably well aware of what you're in for because you potentially have done 3 of these, so congratulations for step 4. And keep an eye out. Today, we will be dropping in some useful links in the chat. Today, we'll be focusing on belonging in the DEIB fundamentals, belonging. And there will be a form for you to fill out that we're going to drop in just a moment. And make sure you fill that out so that you can get your credit where credit is due on your LinkedIn page. So let's get started. You can participate. We encourage you to have your cameras on and you can ask questions in the chat and I can relay them to our fantastic host today and Power to Fly team member, Gabby, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. And if you'd like to ask a question anonymously, you can go to the chat function and select my name, Hunter C, and I can ask that question on your behalf. And if anything comes up, any questions or concerns, you can also DM me in that way, and we can try to handle this as swiftly as possible. And know that this is a shared space. So when you're asking questions publicly in the chat, please be mindful that we all would like to have a lovely time together. This is being recorded, so we'll be sending a link out with that, so you can rewatch that if you want. It's particularly helpful when you're filling out that little pop quiz. Gabby was a teacher, so pop quizzes, I think, are in her arsenal. We already talked about the chat there, and you can keep up with us on socials at Power to Fly on all the things, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch previous talks, summits, and just so much amazing content. Okay, so without further ado, Gabby Fricke here is a global DE&IB strategist and trainer who takes a human-centric approach to her work, helping to translate needs into impactful outcomes. She has worked in a variety of DE&IB sectors, including government, public, and private throughout the past 7 years. Gabby was an inaugural member for her city's Human Relations Commission, where she helped build a system of citizen-informed feedback between residents and elected officials. Her experience ranges from training development and execution, qualitative data collection and analysis, employee relations, and culture change. She believes that inclusion and belonging efforts precede diversity, and building authentic connections is the foundation of a successful company culture. Hear, hear. So we're going to get to learn on all about that belonging section. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Gabby. I'll be here in the background. If you need anything, feel free to message me. And please welcome Gabby. Hi, Gabby Fricke.
Hey, y'all. Oh, so grateful to be joined here this Thursday, whether it's your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you're joining from in the world. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be talking to y'all today about belonging. I see that there's some asked to keep connected in the chat, which is amazing. Seems like a lot of y'all have been through all of these sessions. So let's round it out today with belonging, right? DEIB. What is B? What is belonging? This is a relatively new addition to the DEI acronym. So we're going to define belonging, and especially define belonging and how it differs from inclusion. The second takeaway that we'll have today is how to implement belonging into your DEI practices, right? If you practice DEI explicitly or implicitly at work, what does it look like to move from the traditional DEI acronym to adding the B onto the end? And then we're going to talk about best practices to foster belonging. We've had a lot of great questions submitted, so I've sprinkled the questions and answers throughout this presentation for us today. Again, please feel free to put your thoughts into the chat, if not only just questions, some things that might resonate with you. It's really awesome for me to see what points really resonate and what you're taking away from what we're talking about today. So with that. Yep, let's get back to, there we go. I wanted to start off with a opening question. We're going to go to the antithesis of belonging, and I would love to hear from some of y'all. If you could drop in the chat, think about a time where you felt like you didn't belong, and how did that make you feel? So I'll give everybody a couple moments to drop in the chat. How did that make you feel? Awkward, alone, anxious and isolated, distant, silent, not important, shy, made me feel like an outsider, disengaged. Yeah, right. So we look at some of these words, unsafe, these are not light words, right? Some of these words are very intense. The feelings of anxiety can be very intense, feeling of not being important, feeling unsafe, right? So when we think about why we talk about belonging, I want to have the predecessor of this conversation to talk about what we want to avoid. And we're wanting to avoid these feelings that you all have witnessed or felt at one point or another in your lives. And oftentimes, feelings of exclusion, right? Or feelings that you didn't belong in a certain place or a certain group, those memories can come back from a long time ago, right? We could think about anecdotally, maybe some time on the playground or some time in primary school when we felt like we were picked last for the kickball team, right? Or we weren't asked to join a certain dance. So I really want us to understand that belonging is incredibly important, not only because we want to get to that point of belonging, but we want to avoid those feelings of exclusion that we've all felt. We want to avoid feeling unsafe, feeling left out, feeling distant or anxious or awkward, right? So with that, let's get into the next slide and start defining what is belonging, now that we've talked about what belonging is not. And so belonging, we're going to jump back and forth. We're doing a little cha-cha today, right? So we're going to talk about DEI. And I really love this quote from Verna Myers that explains what DEI is, in a sense, where it says, or D&I, diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So thinking about this, right? If we have DEI in the workplace, is diversity is just being invited to the party. And if I'm invited to a party, that's the first thing that happens, right? I'm in the door. But what distinguishes a good party from a bad party, a fun party from a not so fun party, is the inclusion aspects and therefore belonging aspects of this analogy, right? So you go to a party and inclusion is being asked to dance. But where does belonging fit into this? Let's keep going. Belonging is almost like DEI 2.0. Because that is the only focus, right? That is the focus of beyond just coming to the party, beyond being asked to dance. We're really talking about feeling welcomed, right? We're talking about inclusion, equity, and diversity is all wrapped up into it, right? Belonging is centered in DEI work, and belonging is not only centered, but it is the outcome of a lot of DEI efforts. So I'm going to get into the analogy of the party a little bit more. And belonging is this quote that you see above that this is my party, right? So say you have a dinner party, you're hosting a dinner party, and you have a party that includes vegan guests. So guests who don't eat animal products, that don't eat meat, right? Cheese, eggs, etc., right? You're hosting this party. So when you're thinking about building a culture of belonging, we're really thinking about this in a way that diversity is vegan dinner guests are simply showing up, right? You invited vegan dinner guests to the party. Inclusion is that you're asking these vegan dinner guests, oh, what are some dishes that I can cook for this dinner party that you may like, right? So they're getting their input, they're included in that. Equity is saying, okay, I'm getting this input on what my vegan dinner guests like, but I need to make sure that every part of my meal has a vegan option. And if anybody's vegan or vegetarian, you might know if you show up to a restaurant or you've gone to a dinner party before, sometimes all you'll have as an option is a salad. right? That's not the equity part of it. The equity part of it is saying an appetizer, a main course, a dessert, the salad course, etc., right? All of the parts of that dinner have a vegan option for that person to participate. But belonging, right? Belonging is where this vegan dinner guest in this analogy feels like it's their party. And they feel like being vegan isn't the only thing people talk to them about when they show up to this party, right? They are not just vegan, they are a dinner guest who also happens to be vegan. And then because they're fully accepted, they're fully welcomed, they're not just seen as the vegan dinner guest, they're seen as a dinner guest who happens to be vegan as well. They ultimately don't want to leave the party. So within this analogy, we really need to understand that building a culture of inclusion is great, right? We're including people, we have equity, we have them showing up, but building a culture of belonging is even better. And yes, it takes more time. I see Eleanor says, I find making vegan desserts the toughest, right? It might take more time to make the vegan desserts, and it might take more effort and energy and research, but it's worth it, right? We have to think about the ease versus the long-term impact. And it may be easier to coordinate a dinner party with meal options you're used to cooking or things that are easy to make or easy to obtain. But then the guests who happen to be vegan may not attend again, or they may leave midway through the meal because they're hungry. And that's where that long-term impact comes in. And I'll start translating this, right? That's the retention aspect of the work that we're doing. So we want to be able to host a space where everybody not only feels valued, appreciated, included, but where everyone wants to return to again. So belonging is really that glue that's people are saying, this is my party and I want a party like this again. So let's get into it. We're doing a cha-cha again. So why does belonging matter? Here are some data points that we found is that high belonging was linked to a whopping 56% increase in job performance. 56% increase in job performance, right? That is sort of the business case of this. 50% drop in turnover risk. So thinking about that retention piece again, and 75% reduction in sick days. So when we look about this, right? Also, we know that employees with higher workplace belonging also showed a 167% increase in their employer promoter score, which is their willingness to recommend their company to others. So when we think about this, right, belonging really has these concrete outputs, right, where we're really saying, okay, we're starting to understand what belonging is, why belonging matters, but how do we make concrete efforts and take concrete steps to get these concrete outputs? So let's move on. Belonging is important because even when you have solid DEI efforts, people will be less likely to stay without a sense of belonging, right? So when we think about this, again, this is the 2.0. If you do everything within the last 3 sessions, you'll be in a better place than without those efforts. And at the same time, what is the 2.0 of this? So we're going to talk about next belonging versus fitting in. So I really want to get a little more granular here. When we talk about belonging, I'm going to say that word over and over again, but when we talk about belonging, it tends to be very high level and sometimes ethereal, right? I tend to find when I talk to executive leaders, belonging is seen as somewhat of a kumbaya type of word, right? Oh, we're going to get together. We're going to go hold hands. We're going to be best friends, right? But I really want us to talk about this within the DEI lens where we talk about belonging versus fitting in. And so Brene Brown has some really amazing research on the concepts of belonging, and I encourage y'all to check that out. You can find that easily online. But she says that the opposite of belonging is fitting in, which is interesting, right? You would think if belonging and fitting in are on a spectrum, they might be on the same wavelength or the same spectrum. But when she did her research and we look at this concept, is true belonging never asks us to change who we are. It demands that we be who we are, right? So when we think about the concept of fitting in and why is that the antithesis of belonging is because fitting in is requiring you to change who you are, and it's demanding you to fit in and change who you are at your core in order to show up in a certain place. Yolanda asks, isn't fitting in more like assimilation? If you're a square peg trying to fit into a round hole, then that hurts. Exactly, Yolanda, right? So that's another term that gets utilized very often in DEI, assimilation, or even code switching, right? So having to show up at work in a different way than you would outside of work. So I love this. So yeah, so thinking about this, we're moving away from fitting in. We're moving away from what it looks like to change yourself to assimilate. And we're moving towards thinking about how we can connect together, right? How can we have solidified and central values at a company, shared values, but different cultures? When we think about belonging, it's about being open and accepting and valuing different cultures while also coming together under the same values as a company may lead by. So this is the concept that we want to shift towards, is moving from culture fit, which I'm sure some of y'all have heard, right? Is, oh, is this person a good culture fit, especially in hiring? This is a way that we can start belonging efforts from the hiring process. Let us reframe culture fit, and let's reframe it to being a values fit. And why do we want to do this? Is because every company has a dominant culture. So a dominant culture that can be spoken or unspoken, right? So typically the dominant cultures tend to be dominated or upheld by folks that are in power, right? And we know, and this is getting back to the D and DEI and the folks that, or the E, I guess more so is, and I know y'all saw that power wheel in a previous training, right? Who's at the center of the wheel, who has more power, who's marginalized. So when we think about the D and the E in this aspect, every culture, every company has a dominant culture. It's usually set by those who have more power within the company and externally, socially, right? And then from there, we understand that marginalized people tend to be judged more harshly on the ideas of culture fit as a result of that. So when we think about this, right, who holds the power, who is dictating the dominant culture in your company, and then who is coming into that company and being judged more harshly as being an outlier, or they might not be a culture fit. And I love, Eleanor says, I prefer to be a culture add than a culture fit. Yeah, that's another great reframe, right? So when we think about this, right, culture add, we're adding together, and we have a shared connection in a certain way as well, a shared connection with these values. So the next piece here is focusing on values to create that unity rather than culture. So that's where the assimilation comes in. The assimilation or the fitting in is that culture fit. And so when we think about focusing on values, we can come together and say, okay, we value integrity, we value having fun, we value X, Y, and Z, right? And then people from many cultures and backgrounds can have a sense of belonging within that shared set of values. So let's get into belonging a little bit more. Belonging, and so I know you've talked about psychological safety before. We also had a question that came up before this session, and this person asked, based on your experience, what's the definition of a psychologically safe work environment? So love this insight, because we're about to talk about this here. So fostering belonging in the workplace means that people of all backgrounds get a seat at the table to feel heard, seen, and recognized for their contributions. And so then within that, right, you have these core tenets. So within psychological safety, you have learning, you have challenging, right? You're learning from your mistakes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. We're going to reframe mistakes from being punitive to learning opportunities. And then we're challenging, right? We have the safety in challenging or giving pushback to ideas. But these four tenets is really what's wrapped up when it relates to belonging and psychological safety. And belonging, when it comes to being welcomed, means that employees can feel like their full, authentic selves, right? They can show up to work. And this is sort of my personal take on how I measure if I belong at a workplace or not, is that I understand that I do my best, but I don't always show up as my best, right? I might be my best and perform my best, I don't know, 15 to 20% of the time, and that might even be too much. I perform my best when I can, but I do my best in all situations. So a workplace that allows me to show up authentically is saying, okay, Gabby, today you are doing your best and we honor that. And your best might look different tomorrow or the next day or the next day. But we have faith in you and we trust you that you're doing your job, you're executing it well, and that you're showing up authentically, even if that authenticity changes daily. And especially as a side note here, somebody who lives with a chronic illness, showing up every day looks different. And so that belonging, being welcome to say, okay, Gabby, I understand this about you, and I'm not expecting you to show up in a certain way every day. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but that welcoming feeling is being authentic, showing up as our authentic selves. And authenticity is also, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit contentious right now, I would say. So thinking about authenticity, we talk about this a lot, of showing up at work as our full authentic selves. Well, what does that mean? For me, it looks totally different than what it looks like for you. And so it takes that self-reflection work to say, okay, what does it feel like to be authentic? What do I really need from a workplace? How do I need to show up? So in that way, how am I avoiding assimilation, right? Or if I can't avoid it at this workplace, this is the workplace for me, to be honest. So when we think about employees feeling welcomed, it means that they don't have to calculate their every mood or move or word, right? They don't have to cover up, they don't have to assimilate, because covering up and assimilation and fitting in is emotionally taxing. So as an example, say I was showing up to this meeting today, this presentation, and I speak in somewhat of a Northern Jersey accent sometimes, right? That's my accent. But if I tried to show up and I tried to present in an Australian accent, I would be exhausted after this hour. It would take a lot of energy out of me, right? To switch my language, right? To cover up, to assimilate, whatever, to make that switch takes a lot of emotion. It takes a lot of energy. And the same thing happens when we show up and when we assimilate, or when people, especially from marginalized populations, are expected to assimilate, right? It's emotionally taxing. So being welcomed also means being comfortable, feeling safe, right? I saw a word previously when somebody said lacking belonging or exclusion made them feel unsafe. So psychological safety is safety. And then belonging for me is not only being able to show things, right? Show up in my full self, but it's being able to, show up in a way that I don't have to explain myself all the time. We'll get into that a little bit more. So for me personally, it's being able to work at a place that I can show my tattoos. And for me, the inclusion piece of my tattoos is being able to show up and have tattoos on this recording, right? But the belonging aspect for me at work is showing up and having tattoos and having meetings and people saying, oh, show me your tattoos. Oh, what does that mean to you, right? It's that next step. It's not only that they're accepted, but they're welcomed as well. So I'd love to hear really quickly from the group, can you share what parts of yourself are essential for you to show up and work at work? So for me, it's my tattoos, right? For me, it's every day looks different. What parts of yourself are essential for you to show at work? My queerness, yeah. Belonging is essential to DEI. I feel my best when I can be my authentic self. My neurodiversity, I see. Yeah, and I see a comment, belonging equals come as you are, and that's perfectly okay. I love that. Neurodiverse here too. Queerness and Blackness. Yeah. The realities of being a parent, my lack of style. Yeah, and that's another thing too. This is a whole different training series, but I'm going to give a little nugget about like cross-cultural communication, right? We all have our different ideas of things like professionalism and style and how we should dress at work, especially in remote work. That's very contentious. But I really want us to say, right, what are the dominant cultures at workplaces that you've worked at in dress code? I mean, when you work in person, I think it looks a little bit different, but I've worked in a variety of industries, and some is very relaxed and some is very formal. And then even there's some archaic HR policies that give dress code by gender, by the gender binary, right? So that's like the exclusion in that sense. But I just, that made me think of when you said lack of style. My amazing Black womanist, single parent, the way I speak, my natural kinky and coiled black hair, corny sense of humor and being a sports mom, Hispanic lesbian with tattoos and piercings, Filipino, bi, tattoos, anxiety disorders, PTSD, how I dress. I feel like at the end we need to do a little show and tell with all of our tattoos, not having to hide my intelligence. I love this, right? So when we start doing that reflection work, we can really say, okay, these are my boundaries. This is who I am. And no, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to hide my intelligence or my piercings or hide my beautiful hair. I'm not going to hide these parts of myself to make you feel more comfortable, right? That's, again, that concept can be a whole nother hour-long conversation. Let's keep moving. Psychological safety is feeling valued, right? So respecting and caring for each other as individuals. Oh, sorry, if we can go back to the last slide, Hunter. I said, let's keep moving, and I go off on tangents. Okay, being valued, respecting and caring for each other as individuals and not just as employees, right? That's huge. I want to say that again. Respecting and caring for each other as individuals, not just as employees. I'm showing up as my full self. I'm a full human. I want to be valued and appreciated for being more than just an employee, for more than just what I can produce or what you can gain from me working here. Contributing, right? So this is another huge piece, having your opinions solicited and influenced in decision making. And we'll get more granular into contributing a little bit more, but things like feedback looping, brainstorming, playing a role in major decisions. And then we have challenging, right? So we're going to think about challenging the status quo, and then learning, right? Learning from mistakes, really reframing what that means, and connected, right? That is the ultimate goal. Psychological safety and belonging is to feel connected to something larger than yourself, right? To take ownership and also feel connected to others that you work closely with. Okay. Let's keep moving now. So we talked about what belonging is. We started to define it a little bit more. Now we'll get into the how. We did the what, we did some of the why. What about the how? So there's a question that came up that relates to what we'll talk about in this slide. And so this question says, I find it easier to determine best practices or even company policies to improve DEI at work. But when it comes to belonging, it seems harder to determine which actions to take. What are some actionable steps we can take to improve our team's sense of belonging? So whoever asked this is the next 5 or 6 slides and a good portion of our conversation. You asked the question, that's the meat and the potatoes. So start from the beginning. Welcoming new employees on your team and getting to know them. So when new employees come in, how are you building a sense of belonging? And I didn't even go all the way from the cradle here. If we're thinking cradle to grave analogy, not even just onboarding, but we're thinking about how are you creating a sense of belonging for people who are in the interview phase, who are potential candidates, but really welcoming employees and getting to know them as much as we expect them to learn about us, the job, and the company. So when it comes to learning about a new employee, make it really, really explicit spaces, right? Especially in interviews. My favorite interview tactic when it comes to belonging is to start off with, tell me a little bit about yourself, but then give people space midway through to ask their own questions, right? So if you think about a traditional interview structure, it's okay, out of an hour, I have 50 minutes. If I'm interviewing you, I have 50 minutes to ask my questions. And then if we have time at the end, you'll get about 5 to 10 minutes to ask your questions, right? And that doesn't feel equitable to me. And it feels like we don't we don't care enough to have you have ample space to ask your questions. So what we do, I love this, is halfway through our questions, we pause and we say, okay, now it's time. We have more questions after, but now it's time for you to ask your questions, right? It's small things like that. That might be more related to equity, but I think that's a good piece to take away from this. So we're starting from the beginning. We're making sure onboarding really has structures that allow people to show up and share pieces and parts about themselves. And I really love to think about this in an explicit way, right? We'll talk about how belonging can be explicit and implicit. And I do think company culture and belonging is something that can't always be mandated, but we'll talk about what it looks like to do this explicitly is using a variety of tools. So if you have a new member joining your team, any type of self-assessment and say, hey, we want to get to know you and we want to get to know your work style, your communication style, your feedback style. Would love to see what you can tell us about those different styles, or here are some self-assessment tools that you can go through. And then we can share together what your styles are. And as a team, we can talk about it together and how we're going to integrate all those styles and work collaboratively in the best way, right? So really thinking about that, or explicitly asking questions around how people prefer to communicate, right? And saying, hey, I prefer to brainstorm over Slack huddle, right? Sometimes I have an idea and I might ping you on Slack. Does that work for you? How do you like to communicate? How do you like to brainstorm, right? And then asking how this person can be best supported in their role. So thinking about starting from the beginning, thinking about utilizing tools and resources to really get to know people and not just know them through the evidence of how they work, right? Because over time you'll see, oh, okay, Gabby sometimes shows up a couple minutes late to meetings because she needs a mental break for a second, right? And I know that about Gabby, right? You'll notice things like that down the line, but what does it look like to start from the beginning and start with a good understanding of a person holistically in that way? Okay, next points. We are going to talk about connection, right? So this is part of psychological safety, but check-in questions during meetings or asynchronously, right? If your team has Slack channel or a Teams channel or something that you all connect already on for business, what does it look like to maybe post a fun question every once in a while in there? Just keep those small moments of connection going, reaching out to one another, not only when you need to ask them for something. This is huge, right? There's something about when you reach out to people and you say, oh, I'm reaching out to you, I need this, can you do this, can you do that? What does that relationship look like? What does that connection look like? It's very much business based. It's very much productivity based. But what does it look like to reach out to somebody and say, hey, I thought about you, or hey, I saw this TV show and I thought you might like it, right? Whatever the case may be, checking in with people beyond just for business purposes. But I do want to say that when it comes to connection, right, there's always an asterisk around everything I say. There's no absolute, but when it comes to checking in, when it comes to having icebreakers, whatever the case may be, connection moments, that looks different cross-culturally, right? There are some people who want to show up at work and they say work is work and my life is my life, and they're separate entities, and I don't need to talk about my weekend when I'm at work. I don't want to waste 10 minutes of a meeting time to do a check-in question, right? What does it look like for a team to say that is completely valid? That's just as valid as people who do want to connect, right? I think we over prioritize extroversion. We over prioritize emotional divulgence, right? That is like a very US dominant way of operating in the business world. So I really want, so I see somebody say working remotely, you don't have a built-in water cooler talk. When I see something that reminds me of a colleague, I'll send them on Teams. This is totally you, right? Yeah, so that's the thing. What does it look like to structure remote water cooler talks? Well, not forcing it, right? We're not trying to, again, make people fit in, but opt in. I think that's another reframe, right? Instead of fitting in, you can opt into some of these things. So small asterisk on this, but I do think belonging does have some sort of connection that goes beyond just the business side of things. But within that, it really relies on knowing how people want to show up in the workplace. You have to know, oh, okay, Jennifer doesn't want to spend 10 minutes in the beginning of our meetings checking in. Jennifer would like to or prefer to go right into the work. Or yeah, if we have time at the end, maybe we could do a check-in question instead of wasting time in the beginning, right? And so Eleanor says, I totally agree. Being forced is hard because sometimes you fear being judged. Exactly. So that's what we need to reframe, right? When it comes to belonging and it comes to, I hate the word mandating, but it sort of comes to like mandating some of these things or implementing some of these strategies, we need to really understand we don't want to force these things. So this is related to also to a question that was pre-submitted. Which are your go-to strategies to make sure your team is feeling valued for their work? So that goes into the second piece here, is celebrate or create opportunities to celebrate wins and accomplishments. So that is, I think, one of the best and most direct ways for people to feel valued in their work. And it doesn't have to be these grandiose recognition programs where you get gift cards, right? I mean, that's nice. Who doesn't love a nice gift card? But at the same time, what does it look like to bake this in more regularly? What does it look like to celebrate wins, no matter how small, without it having to have that extrinsic motivator? And that's another great concept. There's I'm pretty sure there's a TED Talk out there about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. This is another tangent, sorry, but people are more motivated by intrinsic motivators, right? And one piece of that is being rewarded or not being rewarded, being recognized versus rewarded. So people tend to perform better on their teams when they're simply recognized and they don't necessarily need to be rewarded. I'm not saying don't give people gift cards. Don't conflate that. But what I'm saying is that recognition efforts go a long way. And it creates that sense of ownership and it creates that sense of teamwork on a team. When you say, oh, hey, the way that you structured this piece of the project really helped me out. Thank you so much, right? Oh, I really appreciate that point that you made. It could be, or I appreciate the words that you said, whatever the case might be. It could be small and it doesn't have to be these large, grandiose celebrations, but make sure to celebrate wins and accomplishments as well. Let's get to the next slide here. So the next is creating systems of feedback looping and integration. So we'll talk about this here and beyond, but having individual contributors play a role in making team decisions, right? Do people on your team, I don't like to say this, but in the hierarchical way, from the bottom up, have opportunities to contribute their thoughts, ideas, perspectives to decisions that affect their daily lives, their work, and the team that they work with, right? Is that connection being made? Do they have that power of influence, right? We're really thinking about not just gathering feedback. I know that there's a lot of questions that I've been asked about, oh, how do we get feedback? How do we measure belonging? That's the easy part. Honestly, the easy part is the measurement, what questions do you ask in your annual survey? The hard part is the implementation and the ongoing communication and the connection for people to say, hey, we heard this feedback, this is what we're going to do with it, and then this is the outcome of those thoughts, right? So thinking about this, we want to have individual contributors not only provide feedback, and then asking for feedback and following up with implementation is the real meat and potatoes of this, right? Creating that system of feedback is level one. So let's get into it a little bit more. I know I had some questions around what surveying questions people can ask when it comes to measuring belonging. So the next slide, we'll talk about that. So surveying and metrics. I know this is a lot of words on here, so bear with me. I had a question that came in that said, how can we measure employees' sense of belonging? Do you have any suggested questions to prepare an engagement survey? So what I will say is that we want to see questions that also sort of relate. You can kind of frame them and relate them back to psychological safety, right? So you'll see some of these questions have psychological safety principles embedded within them. So the first one says, how much would you agree with the statement, I can voice a contrary opinion without fear of negative consequences from leadership and management and my colleagues, right? So that is the principle of psychological safety of challenging. So when we think about challenging the status quo, we didn't get too much into this, but psychological safety is being able to show up with my perspectives, no matter how different they may be, they're accepted. So when we think about this, right, we think about this question, we're measuring to see, can people show up authentically? Can they share contrary opinions? Can they push back on ideas without that fear of negative consequences from leadership, management, and colleagues? The next one is, how much would you agree with the statement, I feel like I could show up as my authentic self at work, right? Very straightforward, the underpinning of this whole conversation today. How connected do you feel to your team cross-departmentally, right? So that's the connection piece of psychological safety. What factors contributed to the rating you gave this question, right? So I always say we want a mixture of qualitative and quantitative, or close-ended and open-ended questions, right? We want to say, okay, yeah, people scored a 3 out of 5 on this question, but we don't really know why. That's kind of that is the worst fear of somebody in data analytics, right? Is to have those answers, but not to have why. I have a question here. Can someone write out the first create point in this? I didn't manage to write it down, and I've got to the others: create small moments, create opportunities, create systems. Oh yeah, create systems of feedback looping and integration. I'm pretty sure that's the last one, and we're still on this one. I had 2 slides because it's so important. And yes, the recording will be shared. Okay, my apology, I'm going all over the place. So when we think about this, right, we want open-ended, close-ended questions. We want to be able to say, this is what people rated this, which is very measurable. We can track year over year, but we also want the insights into why. Why do you feel like you can't show up authentically? Why do you feel like you can't voice your contrary opinion, right? That's really where the work, the magic comes in the work. And so when we think about this, right, we're posing these questions, we're doing this, but again, it's not just about gaining the feedback. The real work and belonging comes with what you do with the feedback after. And that relates all to the DEI as well aspects, but we want to think about communicating which DEI policies, projects, activities are implemented that directly relate back to the feedback that was given. So when I work with companies as a consultant, the biggest mistake I've seen is that people survey without following up, or they survey with too much time before following up, right? So they'll send out a big engagement survey, and then people might not hear anything explicitly related to that engagement survey, or they might not hear about anything until 6-7 months later, right? So thinking about this, we want to make sure to communicate our survey results, and what highlights will directly inform the actions that the company will take moving forward. So, and I see, yeah, I think asking people to do surveys is important, to let them so best practice is anonymous surveys through and through. Best practice is a third party, right, to ensure anonymity, but at the same time, right, making sure your surveys are anonymous and can't be tied back to anybody specifically. So really thinking about communicating the results, and then saying, okay, yeah, we've noticed this trend, and this trend. And so with that, those are the main focus areas that we're going to be moving forward with. And then communicate your strategy from there. So if you're saying, oh, a lot of people have given feedback that they don't have the benefits at this company aren't the best, right? And so what we're doing is saying, okay, let's look at the benefits. The strategy is doing a scrubbing of the policies or procedures or whatever that relate to benefits and how we offer them. We might ask some more questions about what benefits do you want to receive, right? And then you provide regular updates and say, okay, we're starting this project. Oh, we have completed this part of the project, right? We completed this part. You want to make sure to have those regular updates and not just say, we're thinking about this, or we are surveying you, we're getting your feedback. Oh, and then this policy is related to that, right? Because a lot of the times there is a lot of time between inception and execution, full execution. So thinking about this, right, when we survey and we create these systems of feedback, we really want to think about how we're reporting back and how we're communicating in a timely manner. And so you're showing that you're listening and you're taking steps. For example, throughout this presentation, not to toot my own horn, but throughout this presentation, I've been trying to read off whatever questions relate to whatever part of the process I'm in or whatever part of the presentation I'm in, because I wanted to show y'all that if you took the time to send in your questions, we're going to talk about them, right? I value you, and I was really excited to see so many great questions. And so something like that, right? Showing that people's input really matters and is getting integrated into your processes is just as important as collecting that feedback. Okay, I'm off my soapbox with that. And so somebody also asked, what are some ways we can use data to implement and measure DEI initiatives and the results to show our employees that the organization is dedicated, right? So the dedication piece is really about the follow-up, all of the things that I've said above. Okay, the next being allow for different opinions to be heard. So appreciating when somebody pushes back or challenges an idea, right? That's part of psychological safety, and encouraging open dialogue. And the second piece here, treating mistakes as learning opportunities rather than being punitive. And so I forget what it is, but again, you can look this up online. There is one facet of Google, one department where the department leader, when somebody made a mistake, what they would do, instead of making it a punitive experience, they would say, oh, okay, take a day off and reflect on your mistake. Why did you make that mistake? What happened? Could the mistake be avoided? What can you do to mitigate the mistake in the future, right? What are you going to do moving forward, right? There's a couple questions that he would have them reflect on. And so thinking about that is just one story, one analogy to talk about this, but how can we take mistakes, instead of them being punitive, to being learning opportunities? So with that, I love Dr. Angela. I tell my organization that feelings are measurements too. I love that. With that, my final thought here is that belonging is the ultimate goal of DEI. So I would love to hear, I have some other questions that people have asked, but before I get to those, I would love to hear what is something that you've taken away from today's conversation? What's something that you have more questions on? We have about 15 minutes here, so I'd love to hear from the folks that are here today.
Awesome. Oops, I have two. Hold, please.
Oh, you got a nice echo chamber going.
Sorry about that. Multiple devices in this day and age to keep everything running smoothly. So let's give a round of applause to Gabby for that wonderful presentation. Very helpful. I hope y'all learned some stuff. I'd love to hear more about folks' tattoos and their pageant show. No joke, while your presentation was going, some pants that I ordered 5 months ago just arrived, and they're pink. So that's part of my way of showing up, but you can't see that in this frame. So if you have any questions, friends, this is, as Gabby was saying, we have about a little less than 15 minutes left. So any questions you want to ask, this is the time, and we'll also go through some more of those pre-submitted questions. Gabby, you can kind of help me too with those pre-submitted ones of which ones you want to focus more on and which ones we didn't touch on. I was sort of taking notes, but if I repeat anything, forgive me.
No, it's fine. I have the questions written down. So did you want to ask me, or do you want me to?
Well, yeah, you can go ahead and kick us off with the first one, and I can feed us off with the next ones. I have a few that I know you didn't touch on yet too. So is there one that you would like? Oh yes, I am very decorative for Christmas. Thank you for noticing, Eleanor. I appreciate that. There's going to be more coming. Watch out. And the holidays and all that. Okay, so yeah, Gabby, is there a question from the pre-submitted that you would like to kick us off before I pull some?
Yeah, definitely. So I have a couple here. I know somebody posted in the chat, how can we create diversity hiring goals? That is a whole conversation in itself. I'll just keep saying this. DEIB is a black hole of a mixture of just so many concepts intersecting. Diversity hiring goals in relation to belonging. I always say EI and B is the predecessor to diversity hiring goals. But answering your question, really just going off the principles of SMART goals, right? Measuring where you are, who is at your company currently, how do people at your company currently feel, depending on which demographic, right? What are marginalized populations saying about your workplace versus people who are of power or less marginalized, right? So thinking about that, working with belonging, working with inclusion strategies, and then setting diversity SMART goals from the demographic data that you might have. So I know that's a little high level, but that's a little bit outside of the belonging conversation. I do have a question here is, I have two questions about the roles that team members can play and the roles that managers can play in fostering belonging across an organization. So I like this first question. As a team member, how can I help others in my team feel they belong? Would it be appropriate for us to gather outside of work hours? What can I do during my work hours? I love that. Yeah, so really excited to have people that think of belonging even as an individual contributor, right? If you are not somebody who is setting the goals, gaining the feedback, creating the policies, the projects, the procedures, right? You still have a place in belonging work and making belonging a company-wide efforts, right? Belonging efforts aren't always company sanctioned, and they shouldn't be company sanctioned all the time. Belonging is this charge that everyone should get behind. And this question around, would it be appropriate for us to gather outside work hours? That's on your own volition, right? I'm a little bit more people first, company centric. I probably should stop saying that, but people first, and saying, if that's what you want to do outside company hours, that's something you can do on your own volition. I think that's a great way to create a sense of belonging within the work hours. I know in my team, just anecdotally, if I'm running to do something and I'm sending voice memos to a lot of my team members, I'm like, oh, I'm running to the gym and blah blah blah, and I'm chit chatting, and then sometimes it's related to work, and it's just very laissez-faire in that way. So I definitely think that's appropriate. And what can I do during work hours? Again, is reaching out to people, not just when it relates to something that has to do with business or the work that you're doing together, right? Seeing people for their entire selves and saying, oh, I know you were out on vacation last week. How was it, right? It can be super simple. We don't have to overcomplicate what it means to belong or creating a sense of belonging, because we've all had experiences with exclusion, right, on one hand, but we've all hopefully had some experiences of belonging. So think about what has made you feel a sense of belonging, and try to reach out to people in that same way with that empathy. So that was that question. Hunter, I want to give you space.
Yeah, we got a few here, and I love too, because someone asked if I decorated for the holidays, and someone from the chat here asked, how do we create a safe space for all cultural celebration around the holiday season? We're in holiday season here in the States right now, and other parts of the world are also celebrating some stuff coming up. Any thoughts on this, Gabby?
Yeah, there is no holiday season. That was a ringer. Okay, yeah, let me dive in, right? Every season is a holiday season, right? To somebody, to some culture, to some background. And a lot of DEI work that I've done is creating a calendar of cultural observances and holidays, right? So throughout the year, what are you choosing to highlight? What are you choosing to raise awareness on? What are you choosing to, as a company, have discussions around, right? If we're only thinking about the holidays as Christmas, as Hanukkah, as Kwanzaa, right? Like the end of December type of year, we're really limiting the inclusion and belonging that the entire year offers. So, but I will get to your actual question, because I know that wasn't it. Thinking about it longitudinally all year round, but also thinking about it in a way is not saying this is Christmas break, this is holiday break, or this is vacation, right? For people who don't celebrate any of it, I think that simple language change can mean a lot. Not limiting people celebrating specific holidays too, right? It's not that you can't say Merry Christmas or you can't wish somebody happy holidays, but really also recognizing and seeing who celebrates what, right? The discovery of that, I think, is really important, and saying, hey, I know that this is a holiday season for a lot of people. Who celebrates what? If you don't celebrate, what are you planning on doing during that week, right? Especially if your company has the week off, what are you planning on doing with your free time? So not assuming that everybody celebrates, but then also raising awareness, I think, is always great, right? So this is coming up. If there's a holiday that is, say if you work at a US company, right, which is very Christmas centric, is there a way that you can raise awareness about what are the dates of Hanukkah this year, right? What are the actual roots of Kwanzaa, right? And let's debunk some of the myths around some of these holidays that are not part of that dominant company culture that we've talked about previously.
I love that. And there's some great things that people are chiming in here from their work environments. Sophie said, one really fortunate thing we do at Fellow is we offer floating holidays so everyone can use their days off when it makes sense to them. Love
Yeah,
that.
love that
We
best
also,
practice. Yeah.
yeah, Dr. Angela says we have a group called Observances Events and Celebration Networks, which created a calendar by surveying the org. What holidays do the employees celebrate? And we went from there. It's a big calendar, say the least, LOL, but fun.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, getting input to see what's important to people. I work with a lot of companies that have DEI committees, and the DEI committees create a calendar for the year, and we'll do newsletters, like a monthly newsletter, and we'll highlight certain holidays. We'll share links and resources. We encourage people to either donate certain places or volunteer certain places, right? We're kind of like that one-stop shop for the holistic perspective on holidays and involvement in learning. So yeah.
I love that. So we have just 5 minutes left,
Oh,
friends. So just giving us a little time check there. Please go
yes.
ahead, Gabby. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. Hattie said, would anybody be willing to share their calendar so I could use as a blueprint? I know Power to Fly on our website, it's a list. It's not in like a calendar format, but it's a list of different DEI holidays and observances. I think the 2023 one is out currently, but I'm sure there's plenty of people in here that have great resources too. So,
I love that.
yeah, go ahead, Hunter. Do you have another question for
I
me?
have another question. I think it's a really great one to touch on before we wrap up. Danielle Brown said, I really like the point made about extroversion being over prioritized. How do people in minority groups who are introverted shine within a company or during an interview?
Ooh, yes. Well, that's the thing, right? I hate to pick apart this question, but it's not about the people who are marginalized. It's not about people who are introverted, needing to shine. It's about the company is changing, right? I want just to like reframe the way we think about who like holds the deficiencies, because when we talk about DEI, it's like, okay, how can introverts shine, right? Well, it's about being yourself. And if a company, and I know that this is going to be contentious, but if a company doesn't have space for that or doesn't recognize your value and the way you're showing up, is that somewhere you actually want to work? Is that somewhere where you're actually going to belong? Is in the interview process, that part of yourself speaks louder than your competencies and your capabilities. So I just want to, yeah, people first, right? So that doesn't answer your question, but that is what I have for you. And I'm sorry, but I hope that helped a little bit. I think that companies, we need to focus on who has power. Companies, right? Companies hold this power, and companies are the ones that sort of hold those deficiencies of lacking belonging, lacking DEI, and that's who needs to make the effort to allow you to shine.
I love that. Well, we have just 2 minutes left, Gabby. Is there anything that you would like to touch on or wrap up with in these final moments?
Yeah, so I just feel like this is such an energetic conversation across the board. I think that belonging gets wrapped up into like this very ethereal type of understanding of belonging. But I just want to remind us that there are ways to practice belonging, to integrate belonging, but to not force it, right? It's this tightrope walking where we want to create opportunities that are there for people to opt in. They're optional opportunities, but they're still opportunities, right? And belonging is really integral in this sense that we're able to again show up as ourselves and say, oh, that's okay. Today I'm this person and I'm this person tomorrow, but I might not be my best tomorrow. You show up and you try your best, but you're not always your best, and that's okay, and that's welcome and accepted. So that is my last kind of soapbox spiel for all of y'all. I really appreciate the energy in this chat. Hunter, can we save this chat? Because I want to go back and look at all the comments. I love to do that.
Absolutely. Yes, I will do that. And let's again hear it for Gabby. Thank you so much for that, Gabby. That was so powerful. And thank you all for your participation and your questions. You really, as Gabby described, you really drove this presentation. So kudos to you. You know, all those questions Gabby weaved in, and it was really driven by all y'all, and your participation during the chat was really powerful. And I just am humbled to be a part of it. I dropped in that link again for your little pop quiz. You can get that badge. You should be getting that. If you've done all the quizzes, you should get that badge completed. Will be issued for everyone that watched the trainings and completed the work forms. So you can do that. Oh, I love some people are sharing their calendar links. Thank you for that. And with that, thank you all so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever time zone you're in right now. So thanks. And thank you, Gabby. And thank you all.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.